Hi, I'm George Page, and this is the valley of the Yellowstone River. Ever since the end of the last ice age here, some 12,000 years ago, the retreat of winter has been heralded by the haunting calls of sandhill cranes returning to breed. But the history of sandhill cranes reaches back farther even than the ice age, which sculpted this landscape. The oldest fossil of any living species of bird belongs to a sandhill and dates back 10 million years. Perhaps its great antiquity is what makes crane music so soul-stirring. Aldo Leopold, the great naturalist and writer, called their bugling the trumpet in the orchestra of evolution. Unfortunately, we may be hastening the day when that trumpet will be silenced forever. Sandhill cranes migrate thousands of miles, and traditional rest stops along the way are vital to their survival. The most important of these is the Platte River of Nebraska, where a flock of nearly 500,000 float down each spring to rest and feed. But most of the Platte's water has been diverted, and the remainder is threatened by yet more dams. If this happens, the ancient and faithful migration of cranes, likened by Leopold to the ticking of the geologic clock, may wind down. In the soft wash of the late winter twilight, or silhouetted against the rising moon, they come at the appointed time. It's the annual gathering of the cranes, a whole nation meeting in anticipation of spring. Each of them has flown more than 600 miles to come together at this place, one of the last wild stretches of the Platte River. Its braided channels wander across the prairie, sculpting the sandbars where the sandhill cranes roost each night. For millions of years, they have kept this appointment with the river. They come here from wintering grounds that stretch from Mexico to Texas. After they rest and feed, they'll continue the long migration to their breeding grounds, the bogs and low-lying tundra of Canada, Alaska, and Siberia. They descend in small bands, calling to family members in their prehistoric voices, trying not to lose each other in the growing mob. More than 500,000 sandhill cranes will grace these shores by late March. But the first arrivals often find they have come too soon. As a late blizzard sweeps out of the north, the few hardy winter residents of the prairie witness one of the first true harbingers of spring. As gray as the February dawn, the cranes float down with the snow. Here in the cornfields of Nebraska, they have a last chance to fatten up before the next leg of their journey. At last, winter loses its grip on the Platte. For uncounted millennia, the scouring action of the spring flood has kept the sandy bars of the Platte free of vegetation. Only here, surrounded by water with an unobstructed view, do the sandhills feel secure enough to rest, free to escape skyward at the slightest hint of danger. Cranes are not the only birds attracted to the protective waters of the Platte. The shallow channels of open water attract great rafts of waterfowl, pintail duck, and the ubiquitous Canada geese. They seek safety in numbers, but the concentration of so much prey is irresistible. More than 200 bald eagles winter along the Platte. With 9 million waterfowl on their doorstep, they can't resist occasionally testing the flocks for any weak or injured birds. The combination of open water and rich cornfields is a powerful attraction. The traditional migration route of snow geese is to the east, but pressure on critical habitat there has made the Platte Valley an appealing alternative. Each year, more of the gleaming white snow geese, along with some of the less common blue variety, darken the skies of Nebraska. Not all the pilgrims to the Platte are birds. People come from all over the world to witness this wildlife spectacular. The long, cold wait in camouflaged blinds proves well worth it, as wave after wave of cranes descend upon the river with the gathering dusk. Their primeval clamor echoes back 9 million years, when this Congress of Birds was already a rite of spring. Blinds and telescopes are necessary because the cranes are wary and equipped with excellent eyesight. They only roost in channels that are at least 200 feet wide and prefer open vistas of more than 500 feet. "80% of the world's population of sandhills is found here during this critical period of the spring migration. Evolution has not been able to improve upon this efficient and graceful design. The magic of the crane dance is also of ancient design. An outlet for excitement, it's contagious, spreading through groups of birds in the waning light. Early American pioneers called them preacher birds because they believed the congregation was being led in joyous prayer. They also described the Platte as a mile wide and a foot deep. But the raging spring floods, which used to scour vegetation and deposit sandbars, have been tamed. Most of the open channels which the cranes need have disappeared, as forest and fields continue to encroach upon the shrinking river. 3/4 of its flow is already diverted for irrigation, and many more dams are planned, threatening the greatest concentration of cranes in the world. Cornfields have replaced the wet meadows where the cranes once fed on tubers and small animals. Today, they fatten up quickly on waste corn, but it lacks the protein and calcium of their old diet, critical to breeding success. This they can find only in the rapidly disappearing wetlands. The rich food and lengthening days are invigorating. Spontaneous outbursts of dancing become more common. Cranes dance throughout the year, whenever the spirit moves them, but in spring it helps to forge the bond between prospective mates. The choice of a partner is critical because cranes mate for life. This courtly minuet helps diffuse the tension of the pair's growing intimacy and synchronizes their breeding cycles. Late upon the scene, and few in number, the endangered whooping cranes arrive in pairs. These exquisite birds also use the Platte to roost at night, but they don't frequent the cornfields by day. Instead, they hunt in shallow water, so the loss of wetlands has been critical in their fight for existence. It's April, and the mounting excitement of the sandhill cranes becomes tangible. After a month or more of rest and feasting, they're ready to move on. As the first ribbons of cranes unravel over the prairies, they pass over another ancient gathering of birds. In the frosty dawn light, male greater prairie chickens gather each spring on the top of a low hill. This is their lecking ground, the traditional site of their courtship ritual. Their eerie calls resonate in inflated throat sacs and reverberate over the prairie, attracting the females to this mating ground. But first, the males fight among themselves for a central display site within the lek. The females wander from male to male, apparently judging the vigor of each performance. But almost invariably, they choose to mate with the dominant male performing in the center of the lek. Then, as the rising April sun burns through the morning mist, whole fields of sandhill cranes suddenly spring into flight. First, they spend hours crossing and recrossing the Platte. They must commit this place to their collective memory, this sanctuary where the river runs wide and shallow, and where the fields are filled with grain. But each year, they'll see less of a glimmer from the Platte below, unless we choose to protect this river and the birds which depend upon it. Broad wings stretched wide to catch the thermal updrafts, they spiral aloft, climbing the skies in effortless flight. Then they peel off, heading north to their breeding grounds. Families of snow-white whooping cranes join them as they follow winter's slow retreat. They still have the greater part of their migration to accomplish. The whoopers and some sandhills will drop into northern Canada, but most will continue to the Arctic coast. One variety of sandhill crane that does not travel the central flyway is the greater sandhill. They make just a short hop from the Rio Grande Valley to the northern Rockies. Long before the lesser sandhills have reached their Arctic destination, the greater sandhills, a closely related but larger race of crane, is scouting for breeding territories among the willow flats of Grand Teton National Park. They share their mountain haunts with another beautiful and rare bird, the trumpeter swan. One of the heaviest of birds to fly, they need a running start to get airborne. True to their romantic image, they pair for life. They'll return to the same nesting territory each year and defend it vigorously from other swans. On the larger lakes, they may meet up with common loons. They too forge strong pair bonds and choose their mates through a series of courtship rituals. One of these is called the circle dance, part merry-go-round, part staring contest. The creatures that use the smaller ponds for feeding and nesting have North America's largest rodent to thank, the beaver. By damming streams to make a secure home for itself, the beaver creates a unique habitat enjoyed by the entire community. As soon as the winter snow melts, each pair of greater sandhills begins searching for a suitable nesting territory. Ideally, it should have a nest site surrounded by water and good feeding grounds, wetlands, where they can dig with their bills for edible roots, crustaceans, and insects. Established pairs return to the same territory each year. When they meet their neighbors at the boundary line between them, unison calling helps establish ownership over their own patch of marsh. The tension of the encounter sets off a round of dancing. Soon after arriving, the cranes begin painting themselves by spreading mud and decaying vegetation over their feathers. Iron oxides in the mud gradually change the color of their plumage to a reddish brown, an effective camouflage next to the tawny vegetation of the marsh. Both birds help build the nest, which may be several feet across. The male stands guard while the female lays the eggs. Incubation begins when the first egg is laid, but after a day or two, a second egg completes the clutch. The eggs will hatch in the order that they're laid, giving the older chick a decided advantage. Incubation is a task shared by both parents, who change shifts every 2 or 3 hours, with the female taking over in the late afternoon to remain on the nest all night. Even during incubation, the birds continue to build up the nest, a life-saving measure should the water rise in a late spring flood. Other birds, like the yellow-headed blackbird, may benefit from nesting near the cranes. The large, aggressive birds defend their nest fiercely, driving any potential predators, like this striped skunk, well out of their territories. Food supplies are limited in the crane's wetland territory, so other cranes are no more welcome than the skunk. Last year's offspring may be tolerated, but rival birds are fought with vigor. The ruckus attracts other cranes. They're always eager for a little excitement. Neighboring pairs announce their sovereignty in a unison call. The similar origins of fighting and dancing in the release of tension and aggression becomes apparent as the two cranes leap and kick at one another. Eventually, the territorial owner is victorious. But by and large, the 30 days of incubation pass quietly as spring ripens into summer. In the stump of a dead aspen tree, a pair of mountain bluebirds already has a family to feed. Both parents are kept busy continually, capturing enough insects to feed their brood. As soon as the first brood fledges, the female is likely to lay a second clutch, while the male cares for the first group of fledglings for another week. The wetlands where the cranes nest are also used by Canada geese. Broods of goslings merge into small armies as the parents herd them to the best feeding areas. There's a new arrival at the crane nest as well, where the first chick to hatch sits nestled in the down of its mother's back. It has the best seat in the house to observe its new world, including a visit by a cinnamon teal. Still wobbly, the precocious chick begins to explore the nest, under the careful eye of both its parents. As she rises to gently roll the second egg, she discovers that the chick has already pierced the shell. Breaking out of the egg is a critical and arduous task, and the first test of the chick's strength and endurance. As much as 24 hours may elapse before the baby bird finally escapes from its delicate prison. Free at last, it lies exhausted, waiting for its soggy down to dry and the fluids from its swollen, rubbery legs to be absorbed. The parent usually eats the empty shell and membranes. Full of calcium and protein, it's too valuable to discard. Within an hour or two of hatching, the tawny down has dried and fluffed up, but the young bird is still weak and easily chilled. It will be brooded for at least another day. By this time, the older chick is already quite mobile and begins to beg from its parents. Red-winged blackbirds also nest here. These feisty little birds harass the giant cranes without mercy if they get too close to the blackbird's nest. The opportunistic cranes would gladly raid the nest if they could find it, but dive-bombing blackbirds are enough to discourage them. All this aggression sets off yet another bout of dancing. Although the first chick hatched only a day before his sibling, the difference in their ages is critical to their survival. The older chick is well coordinated and quick to turn on its younger, weaker sibling. As they grow, this aggression can intensify, but the parents won't break up the fight. Most pairs raise only a single chick, and the competition between the siblings assures that the strongest will survive. The father is attracted to this fracas and calls the older chick away from the nest. By physically separating the young, opportunities for fighting are greatly reduced. Each parent will care for a single offspring. The female broods the younger chick for its first day or two of life, until it has developed the coordination and balance to follow her through the marsh. Soon the family has completely abandoned the nest site. Each parent leads its gangly chick, called a colt, into the lush cover. The parent carefully selects food items of just the right size and delicately offers them to the colt. With this tender care, within 2 months the colts will grow from a few ounces to more than 6 pounds and be almost as tall as their parents. But while the greater sandhills have begun their breeding season, the lesser sandhills are still in the midst of their epic journey. By May, they have reached the mountainous coast of Alaska, the last true stronghold of the bald eagle. A raven tries to chase the eagle from its territory, but the lure of plentiful salmon that has drawn the eagles to this rugged glacial valley is powerful. The graceful swoop of the adult eagle seems effortless, but it's actually a hard-won skill. The first year of an eagle's life is often a race between hunger and its ability to master this hunting technique. But when the salmon are running, no one starves, and great numbers of bald eagles congregate in these valleys. Younger birds, which have not yet perfected their hunting skills, sometimes find it easier to steal a meal. While the eagles squabble over their feast, the lesser sandhills are following the spring thaw to the coastal tundra. At the Copper River Delta, they overtake another mass migration. Millions of shorebirds on their way to Arctic breeding grounds. Arctic terns, on the last leg of their long migration, are already forming pair bonds. Males deliver minnows to their mates as part of their courtship. Vast flocks of shorebirds, especially western sandpiper, dunlin, and redknot, exploit the muddy flats of the delta. They spend their days gorging on the abundant invertebrate life hidden beneath the mud. As many as 250,000 birds will feed in a single square mile of the tidal flats. They use this vital staging area much as the Platte River was used by the cranes, which only now, in mid-May, pass over this crowded scene. But their journey takes them farther north. Some will travel all the way to Siberia, but many drop down into the fertile wetlands of the Yukon Delta, a watery wilderness that is a paradise for breeding birds. Arctic loons raise their young on the larger lakes, where fish are abundant. While dunlin prefer the tiny puddles of meltwater for their baths. As soon as they arrive, pairs of lesser sandhills select a nest site. The Arctic summer is short. There's no time to waste. These birds frequently lay only one egg, allowing both parents to concentrate on protecting their single chick. Crane nests are widely scattered and hard to find, but a nearby colony of brant geese attracts a legion of predatory glaucous gulls. If the geese are not constantly vigilant, the gulls will quickly snatch the eggs and the young. The emperor goose is always wary and rarely, if ever, leaves its down-lined nest during incubation. As soon as the young hatch, the mother leads them to the neighboring pond, where they will be relatively safe from predators. A burst of short-lived flowers marks the peak of the brief Arctic summer. Already, the Arctic tern is readying to depart on the longest migration route of any bird. Following summer from pole to pole, they travel from Arctic tundra to Antarctic waters and back again every year. Beautifully camouflaged against the lichen, even the uncommon black turnstone finds ideal nesting conditions on the Yukon Delta. Eskimo people also used to come here to collect eggs and down, and to feast on the waterfowl. But with changing times, most have left this changeless landscape to the wind and the birds. All the crane's travels have been in preparation for a single vital task, rearing their colt. In a little over 8 weeks, it must be able to follow them on the long trip southward. The Arctic summer promotes this rapid growth, with 24 hours of daylight in which to feed on the incredible bloom of insect life. The colt soon learns to forage for itself, but it still needs protection from predators. The parent calls a warning. A Jaeger would make quick work of an unescorted chick. In answer to its parent's call, the colt hurries into deep cover and stays there until the danger is past. Each day, the sun sinks lower in the sky. Autumn mists gather in the hollows, and all too soon, they must be ready for the pilgrimage south. By the end of August, snow squalls reclaim the tundra, and the cranes reclaim the north wind. They gather from the far-flung marshes, heading east to avoid an open water crossing of the Gulf of Alaska. This takes them past Mount McKinley. Delicate ribbons of cranes, some 5 miles high, pass over the crown of the continent. A few cranes will land on the tundra to rest and feed, where they find caribou doing the same. They too are migrating south, but only as far as the boreal forests. Most of the cranes pass overhead in large flocks, leaving the rest of Alaska's residents to prepare for winter in their own way. Moose are putting on fat and finding their winter ranges. The grizzly bear spends each minute of the waning daylight in search of food to carry him through his long winter sleep. He spends hours harvesting the abundant fall crop of blueberries that mat the Alaskan landscape. Perhaps the most ingenious winter strategy is the beavers. It builds a food cache by gathering willow branches and burying them in the muddy bottom of its pond. It will spend the winter safe inside its lodge, swimming out below the ice whenever hunger strikes to collect branches from its submerged larder. Usually nocturnal, the beavers work even in midday as the freeze-up nears. As the cranes depart, they leave winter in their wake. Willow ptarmigan begin to shed the brown plumage of summer, replacing it with winter's white. The grizzly searches for one last meal before deep snow drives him into his winter den. Families of sandhills follow the patterns learned by many thousands of generations before them. They join forces over the Canadian Rockies and reach the edge of the Great Plains. They arrive just as the grain fields are being harvested and the native prairie marshes are ripe with natural foods. The cranes will remain here in Saskatchewan for several weeks, gaining strength for the final leg of their journey south. The rarest and most anxiously awaited arrivals here are the whooping cranes. A network of local farm families and avid bird watchers record the first evidence of the past season's breeding success. There are only about 25 breeding pairs of these endangered birds in the wild, so each chick is a cause for celebration. But for every buffy-headed chick seen here, there is a sibling alive and well. During the nesting season, biologists take one of the whooper's 2 eggs. Some are transported to Idaho and given to sandhill crane foster parents. It's hoped that these will become founders of a second wild population. The other eggs are used to start captive breeding flocks. The precious few in the wild flock find food and roosting spots in the ponds of Canadian farmers, while overhead, flocks of snow geese pass by on their way back south. In 1941, there were only 16 whooping cranes left. A half-century of international effort has raised that number to about 200, but they are still far from safe. Their struggle has made one thing clear. It is wiser to protect a species before it begins to disappear than to try to pull it back from the brink of extinction. To lose the dance of the cranes would mean losing a marvel beyond our understanding, a wordless message from a world we never knew. Strong wing beats launch the sandhills into the crisp October air on the next leg of their ageless journey to their winter homes in Mexico and the Southwest. The whooping cranes follow, a living tribute to the Americans and Canadians who decided to save this graceful wanderer. The entire flock of alabaster birds is headed for a single destination, the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge on the Texas Gulf Coast. In prime condition after their weeks of rest and feasting and intent on reaching their wintering grounds, the cranes will stop only rarely now. Both sandhill and whooping cranes follow a similar route until they go their separate ways. Meanwhile, the greater sandhill cranes of the Rocky Mountains have also begun to funnel southward. They follow the western slope of the Rockies into the drainage of the upper Rio Grande. Although much of this region's crane habitat has been lost, a few important wintering sites remain. Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico is a prime wintering ground. Situated below the arid Magdalena Mountains, the refuge probably has been a haven to wildlife since prehistoric times. A variety of shallow marshes and ponds provides perfect roosting sites for the cranes, snow geese, and other wintering waterfowl. In this crowded oasis, the calls of the snow geese rise to a deafening roar. They seem to completely fill the shallow ponds, where native mule deer must negotiate the masses of birds. Corn has been planted in Bosque del Apache to attract the geese and cranes, and to keep them from straying into neighboring farm fields. In past years, young whooping cranes would appear among the host of sandhills. These were the young raised by greater sandhill foster parents in Idaho. They were the result of those egg-swapping experiments designed to create a second wild population of whooping cranes, an insurance policy against a single disaster wiping out the only remaining wild flock. But the transported whoopers, larger and more aggressive than their foster parents, have failed to breed, and the experiment is being reevaluated. Several hundred miles to the east, in the high desert plains of Texas and New Mexico, the lesser sandhill cranes finally end their 4,000-mile migration from the Arctic. In this unlikely and desolate landscape, 400,000 cranes rain down into the shallow playa lakes of such havens as the Muleshoe and Bitter Lake National Wildlife Refuges. Their rest is hard won. In the past year, they have spanned the entire North American continent twice, a pilgrimage from desert wilderness to Arctic tundra and back again that has been reenacted annually for millions of years. But unless we protect all the critical stopping places along their time-worn path, the ancient and faithful migration of cranes could fail. And it would not be the crane's failure, it would be ours. But for the next few months, the cranes need only rest and recuperate from their travels. Soon enough, they must be ready to climb the gray wind once more, to renew their primeval contract with a returning spring.
If you enjoyed nature, discover the other fine shows that offer insight into the natural world around you. Call 1-800-344-7529 for a free copy of this month's Oregon Focus. Find out what you've been missing on OPB. Now, stay with us for Part 3 of After the War on Masterpiece Theater.
On the Wing, The Life of Birds from Feathers to Flight by Bruce Brooks, a companion book to the Nature series, is available in bookstores everywhere.